Welcome to the North Carolina State Medical Response System Initial Training Program for the State Medical Assistance Team. This presentation covers Module 2, Responder Health and Safety. Module 2, Responder Health and Safety, comes with 8 primary objectives. They begin with discuss SMAT health and safety, describe the SMAT individual and team issues important to mitigating health and safety risks, describe health and safety concerns associated with team and equipment transportation, describe environmental conditions affecting SMAT health and safety, describe SMAT deployment hazards and mitigation measures to protect health and safety, review SMAT security concerns, describe SMAT member mental health concerns, and review the roles and responsibilities of the SMAT safety officer. We begin many of these presentations with a note on safety. We do this because, as a responder, you need to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Responder health and safety begins with adequate preparation at home prior to any disaster event. It is critical for responders to maintain disaster readiness for their family and home environment. SMAT members should address the status of their own personal, physical, and mental health in addition to concerns for SMAT team health and safety. SMAT members should address individual measures to mitigate their own risk during deployment. For example, SMAT members should comply with immunization recommendations and any physical standards recommended for SMAT deployment. There are also recommended packing lists for deployment equipment for individual SMAT members that may relate to health and safety. Many of these measures are described in greater detail in the module devoted to deployment readiness. It is important that you as a responder maintain a level of health that enables you to perform the duties of an SMRS or SMAT member. If you are on any type of medication, you should ensure that you have an adequate supply with you for the length of the deployment. You should carry at least a 2-week supply of these medications. Also, the potential SMRS or SMAT member should realize that an acute exacerbation of a chronic illness might be a reason for early demobilization. It is imperative that you attend to your individual health needs to ensure you remain an effective and contributing team member. It is strongly recommended that you undergo a physical examination by your primary care physician each year. If you are sick or not fit to deploy, do not deploy. As a North Carolina SMAT member, each responder must understand policies and procedures regarding SMAT workforce protection, personal and team safety, and security. Each SMAT member must also understand the health and safety measures related to incident command roles and responsibilities, for example, the safety officer, and how safety is maintained or enforced in a field environment. This slide highlights some of the examples of items that are the team members' responsibility for taking care of. Some of these include making sure that your home disaster plan is up to date, that you have received all of the necessary immunizations, and that you are physically capable of working in an austere environment. In this next section, we're going to be talking about some environmental factors related to the health and safety of responders in austere environments. The anticipated environmental conditions should be assessed for every field deployment site. Situational awareness starts the moment SMAT personnel are alerted of the potential for deployment. Situational awareness is a state of mind. As an SMAT member, you should anticipate potential mobilizations and the anticipated health and safety issues. Upon alert for potential deployment, your attention should turn to the specific event and its specific relevant health and safety issues. As team members perform last-minute packing, they should consider factors such as forecast of ambient temperatures, wind conditions, potential for flooding, field sheltering, etc. Selecting environmentally appropriate personal clothing and appropriate equipment is critical to your overall safety and comfort. North Carolina has a wide range of weather conditions and seasonal weather patterns. Due to the geographic variability of the state, from coastal conditions to high elevations, particular attention to environmental factors should be considered during preparations. Expected environmental conditions will be included in the pre-deployment safety briefing and in each daily briefing. On the next couple slides, we're going to talk about some conditions related to extremes of temperatures, and then we'll talk about them in a little bit more detail in Module 6, Deployment Readiness. Everyone knows North Carolina is hot and humid in the summer, particularly in the coastal regions. The general precautions of proper hydration and appropriate barriers from excessive sun exposure are important measures to be taken by every SMAT member. Responders are at high risk for heat-related illness. A fluid loss equivalent to 3% of body weight can severely affect performance and well-being. Also consider that a healthy and fit responder will have an easier time acclimating to hot, humid conditions than an unfit responder. Recognizing early signs of heat-related illness is the key to preventing or mitigating more serious heat-related injury. The recognition of fatigue, nausea, headaches, excessive thirst, muscle cramps or pain, profound generalized fatigue, etc. is important in the context of a hot and humid environment, as they may present the early signs of a significant heat-related illness. If these symptoms or signs are present, notify the appropriate command staff immediately. Team safety activities during hot and humid deployments should include ample time for the cooling of staff and patients and for hydration breaks. As a reminder, your PPE may increase risk for heat illness. Some of the common signs and symptoms of heat-related illness include, but are not limited to, the following: fatigue, nausea, headaches, excessive thirst, lack of sweating, muscle cramps, profound fatigue, and altered mental status. Prevention of heat injuries is an individual and team function. Individuals should realize that it is important to begin hydration upon receipt of an alert or an activation notification. Another factor to assist in the prevention of heat-related injuries is the appropriate use of barrier methods like sunscreen, proper clothing, hats, and sunglasses. During the deployment, attention should be given to proper work-rest cycles to allow for adequate hydration, cooling, and voiding. Other ancillary devices to assist in cooling may include cooling vests, misting fans, and shade. As a reminder, the water you drink today helps you tomorrow. In some seasons, North Carolina can be quite cold. When cold conditions are combined with dampness, hypothermia can be a serious concern. Hypothermia is a condition that can occur when the body loses too much heat, causing the body's core temperature to fall below the normal 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit mark. The initial signs of hypothermia include impaired motor skills, speech, and loss of decision-making capabilities. As hypothermia progresses, affected individuals may seem confused or deny that they are even cold. They may become weak or tired, breathe more shallowly, and even stop shivering. The decreased core temperature affects the victim's mental state, and they may behave irrationally. As the body gets colder, muscles become stiff and the heartbeat uneven. Unconsciousness and death can follow. Hypothermia can develop quickly after exerting effort in the cold because the body's ability to produce heat decreases while the rate of heat loss increases due to the activity performed. To prevent this type of hypothermia, it is important to keep hydrated, dress properly for conditions, and get into a warm environment as soon as possible. For cases of severe hypothermia, immediate medical attention is required. Direct factors contributing to hypothermia include wind chill, ambient temperature, and wet conditions. Cold water immersion causes a convective heat loss that is 25 times greater than exposure to cold air at an equivalent temperature. Changing out of cold and wet gear is a good preventative measure to avoid or lessen the chance of hypothermia or frostbite. While I give you a brief overview of frostbite, look over the slide above and review the different levels of hypothermia. In severe cold weather conditions, frostbite is possible. The extremities most affected by frostbite are the fingers, feet, nose, and ears. Symptoms of frostbite include numb, red, and slightly swollen skin. The skin can appear gray or yellowish, and then become red and flaky after thawing. With severe frostbite, blisters often appear along with pale, cold, waxy, and hard skin. Gradual, not sudden, warming is essential for areas affected with frostbite. While rubbing chilled hands, feet, or the face may help with circulation, doing so will only cause more tissue damage if actual frostbite has occurred. In the cold, the arteries in the heart constrict and blood pressure rises. This increases the potential for a heart attack. Those who are unaccustomed to regular physical activity are up to 30 times more likely to suffer a heart attack when they engage in sudden activity or there is a great physical exertion, such as moving heavy materials or equipment in a cold environment. At the end of Part 1, we were discussing environmental concerns. Another environmental concern that must be considered is insect vectors and animals. For example, foods and other natural disasters can create an optimal environment for the proliferation of mosquitoes. Insects can cause bites and stings that result in wounds that lead to infections. They can also cause envenomations that lead to toxin-related allergic reactions or tissue necrosis. This also leads to localized reactions or life-threatening situations in sensitive individuals, and may be a vector for the transmission of disease. For example, mosquitoes, which can transmit diseases such as the West Nile virus, and ticks, which can transmit Lyme disease, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, etc. In the United States, North Carolina has the most cases of Rocky Mountain spotted fever each year. To prevent insect bites and stings, team members should consider several items. First, insect repellent. Second, protective clothing like long sleeves, long pants, and enclosed footwear. Next, should think about bed nets for barrier protection, and personal allergy medications for those with severe or known life-threatening allergies. How about a trivia question? I want you to take a moment and pause the presentation, find a piece of paper, and write down the 6 types of poisonous snakes that can be found in North Carolina. And then when you think that you've got them all, restart the presentation and see if your answers match up with mine. Good luck. Okay, let's compare answers. By the way, if you used Google, you're a cheater, and cheaters never win. So, here are the 6 types: copperhead, cottonmouth, coral snake, and canebrake, as well as the eastern diamondback and pygmy rattlesnakes. This slide lists several of the insect threats and the preventative measures that can be used to reduce exposure to these threats. You have to remember that in a disaster setting, especially in the presence of flooding, that the humans, animals, and insects are all going to be fighting for the same small amount of dry land. With this in mind, you can expect to see higher populations of insects and animals in closer proximity to your base of operations, so you must remain vigilant to protect yourself and your other team members from exposure to any potential harmful situation. Depending on the disaster, animals may be present due to release or abandonment. Animals are not immune to the physical and mental stress experienced during a disaster. This stress may make animals more aggressive toward people and other animals. Since in many cases these animals are in search of a food source and perhaps water, special care is needed regarding the management of food supplies and waste disposal, which is a topic to be discussed later in this module. The presence of animals in general population shelters amid persons who require medical services is a common concern. It is important to coordinate operational plans with appropriate agencies responsible for animal control. In addition, responders should not approach wild animals, nor should they feed other animals near the deployment area. As a general rule, do not approach or encourage contact with stray animals. This exposure to rabies from certain mammals, like dogs, skunks, foxes, squirrels, raccoons, and bats, continues to be a sporadic problem in North America. Any bites, scratches, or injuries received from any animal during deployment should be promptly reported to the SMAT safety officer and appropriate medical officer. There are also several potential electrical hazards that are present during SMAT operations. As mentioned in the section on transportation, a downed power line represents a serious electrocution risk. The SMAT team should work with the local utility representative to ensure that errant electrical lines are disconnected and not energized while members are at risk. The SMAT safety officer should be made aware of any concerns related to electrical source safety. Any power line or electrical wire found at the disaster site should be assumed to be hot or actively conducting current and regarded as a potential danger until cleared by a qualified electrical or utility worker. Gasoline or diesel generators for producing electricity are often present at disaster response sites. In addition to representing an electrocution risk, these devices can be a significant source of carbon monoxide exposure and loud noise. Because of the risk associated with these machines, trained and experienced logistical staff who have been trained and have experience with the necessary tasks should conduct the servicing and operation. Generators should be properly grounded and placed in locations that will minimize the chance of exhaust exposures to working and living quarters. Once started, consideration must be given to the safe refueling of the unit. When refueling is needed, the generator should have its electrical load switched off or to another generator and the unit shut down. As refueling is carried out and the unit is restarted, the risk of fire is elevated, so special attention should be given for providing fire protection at these stages. All equipment with a power source or battery has the potential for causing electrical injuries and related burns if misuse or malfunction occurs. Field conditions are often wet and windy and may have limited local visibility. Each of these could contribute to an electrical-related mishap. The use and storage of all equipment, especially electrical, should consider the environment and condition of use. Selection and use of power cords, extension cords, and any adapters placed in any electrical circuit should always comply with manufacturer's instructions and guidelines. All circuits should contain ground fault interrupting devices. These devices help prevent electrocution if the circuit encounters water, which can be a likely event in disaster response situations. Mud, sludge, sewage, debris, and dislocated items all represent some very specific environmental hazards that can be faced during a disaster. In heavy rain or flooding conditions, mud or sludge is everywhere and makes walking and driving difficult. The physical changes in a mud-soaked surface can be life-threatening to walk on or make affected structures unstable. Walking in mud-filled areas can lead to falls or entrapment and may be life-threatening. Entering a building or working near mud-filled hills or slopes can be life-threatening due to movement of the mud or structural collapse. Driving a vehicle on mud or sludge-covered roads is dangerous due to loss of traction, potential for debris, and associated road surface damage. Mud is a slurry of substances and may contain potentially dangerous contaminants. Skin contact or airborne dust inhalations are two risks associated with mud and the local environment. Prolonged exposure is to be avoided, and thorough washing with soap and copious water should be promptly done post-exposure. Appropriate precautions should be used, and guidance by the safety officer should be sought during these conditions. Exposure to human and animal waste is a concern in field deployment conditions. In addition, particular disasters are prone to disrupt usual waste management containment methods. In flooding situations, it is not uncommon for raw sewage to be released from overwhelmed water treatment plants and septic systems. Responders should avoid contact with contaminated water and adhere to strict hygiene practices to avoid inadvertent ingestion via hand-to-mouth transmission. Every disaster also disrupts the local environment to some degree. Collapsed structures, containers, trees, telephone poles, power lines, overturned vehicles, along with other items like propane tanks and caskets, may become dislocated and contribute to debris. Local hazards such as standing water, darkness, etc. may augment such dangers. This may make even a simple, usually routine task like driving a vehicle or even walking a treacherous undertaking. Situational awareness, route planning, limiting the exposure of team members, and coordination with command staff are all important. The disruption caused by disaster events can also result in responder exposure to potentially hazardous chemical, biological, or radiological materials. Exposures can stem from intentional releases in the form of terrorist attacks. However, unintentional or natural disasters resulting in fires, explosions, flooding, etc., may cause the release of dangerous materials from industrial sites, homes, schools, laboratories, or any business site that uses toxic substances. Determining the presence, threat analysis, and action steps are beyond the typical SMAT member. However, the command staff should have access to hazardous materials experts. The identification and characterization of the hazardous materials is important in order for responders to be able to take the appropriate protective measures to preserve their health and well-being. SMAT members should notify the command staff immediately if any suspicion of hazardous materials exposure is present. The importance of proper training and the use and the proper fitting of personal protective equipment are important for every SMAT member if there is potential exposure for hazardous materials. Casualty and workforce decontamination in the field deployment setting may be an important part of preparedness and operations. Evacuation planning and route selection, as well as access to appropriate transportation, are important to any field operation where exposure to hazardous materials is a component of the emergency response. A special note is warranted regarding odors. With a loss of power and perhaps water damage, sites of disasters can quickly become malodorous and may affect SMAT members' duty performance. Odor identification and control measures are important. They may help identify particular chemicals, natural gas leaks, or simply be pungent and limit workforce duties. Of particular note are the noxious smells related to dead animals or human remains. Although very unpleasant, these odors are usually not a health concern for infectious disease transmission. Deployments require concern for injury prevention. Lifting and movement of supplies can pose a significant risk. Responders should follow your team's protocol for equipment movement, seek assistance with loads, and adhere to proper lifting techniques. Some useful guidance regarding proper lifting techniques include: if you must lift objects, do not try to lift objects that are awkward or too heavy to lift by yourself. Also, do not hesitate to ask for assistance. Ensure you have a firm footing before lifting any heavy object. Keep your back straight, bend at the knees and hips. Do not bend forward at the waist with your knees straight. Stand with a wide stance, close to the object, and lift using your leg muscles, and straighten your knees in a steady motion. Avoid lifting heavy objects above your waist, and hold objects close to your body and walk in small steps. The use of work gloves is also highly encouraged, as their use can improve grip and minimize pinch injuries that can occur when assembling tent shelters. Sturdy work gloves also provide protection when removing debris that can often contain sharp metal objects like nails, screws, and broken glass. Appropriate footwear is also important, and a good example of appropriate footwear are the boots worn by most EMS, law enforcement, or fire personnel. At a minimum, footwear must be closed-toed and must fully cover your heel. At no point are flip-flops or other sandals appropriate for wear in the disaster environment. In the midst of a field deployment, team members are naturally focused on the disaster and its effects on the casualties. Significant responder health risks are inherent to field communal living conditions. Simple but important health and safety measures can decrease the likelihood of significant injury or illness for all SMAT members and casualties. Strict attention should be paid to the sources of water and food. When possible, bottled water from a known supplier should be used. If unavailable, an accepted technique for purifying water should be employed. If the food source for the SMAT is compromised, a foodborne illness outbreak could render a large portion of the unit inoperable. It is a best practice to use only food designated for deployment and to avoid donated or improperly stored foods. It is highly probable that during your deployment, well-meaning citizens may bring food as token of their appreciation. The consumption of these foods may represent a health risk and should not be consumed unless they are in a commercially sealed package and approved for consumption by the safety officer or your public health representative. As a matter of public relations, the food should be graciously accepted and, if necessary, later disposed of in a non-offensive and discreet fashion out of the sight of the donors. Frequent hand washing is one of the best measures to protect team health. When potable water is available, complete hand washing with soap for 30 seconds will greatly aid in the reduction of possible disease transmission. When potable water is not available, hand sanitizer gels or wipes can be also used. Setting up multiple hand washing or gel access stations and signage is also helpful. Additional information on this will be described in the infection control module. Proper solid waste management is also extremely important for ensuring team health. For example, placing discarded food or scraps in sealed containers, trash storage and removal as promptly as the situation allows, and covering all trash receptacles are important techniques. Also, placing toilet facilities at a safe distance from food service areas is an equally important technique. There are many important considerations to improve safety and security in the field. The following provides a practical list of items that may improve SMAT member safety and security while in the field. When traveling to or from the deployment site, whenever possible, travel in a convoy. All the vehicles must make every effort to stay in the same sequence throughout the movement of the convoy to make it easier to account for each vehicle. There should also be a map in each vehicle that has the route and alternate route marked on it. Every SMAT member will have a buddy and operate using the buddy system. This will especially be utilized anytime a member leaves the larger group at any time. A very well marked perimeter must be established, and anyone that the SMAT member does not recognize will be brought to the attention of the SMAT security staff or SMAT team leadership. A daily roll call will be taken at the beginning of each operational period to ensure no one has gone missing since the end of the last period. This will also be referred to as accountability. The list from the previous slide continues with SMAT members and visitors will adhere to monitored entry points and comply with check-in and check-out procedures. In general, SMAT members must not carry weapons, as the use of deadly potential life-threatening force should be a law enforcement responsibility. SMAT policies will address under what conditions sworn law enforcement officers may carry weapons. Consider all information about the deployment site, operations, and security measures as highly sensitive information. Do not share sensitive information with people who are not part of the SMAT operation. Refer to your team social media policy as well. When extra supplies, especially food and water, are not being used, they will be stored in the most secure area possible and out of sight of the public. As each response is different, the site security staff may implement other measures as they apply to the particular situation. For example, local law enforcement organizations may limit travel outside of the SMAT compound due to local curfew laws. As described in a later module entitled Deployment Readiness, an important part of fitness for duty is mental health. While on an SMAT deployment, members may be exposed to situations and events that are extremely unsettling, such as casualty death, communal field living conditions, and climate extremes. Every SMAT member may endure stress as part of the deployment. The signs and symptoms of early detrimental effects may be difficult to recognize. They may include changes in eating habits, emotional expression, social withdrawal, and/or profound fatigue. Each of these reactions may be an appropriate response to the surrounding field environment, such as witnessing the death of a casualty, discovering human remains, long hours of work, limited sleep, and communal living conditions. It is important to recognize when you or a fellow team member are experiencing signs of stress that are increasing and/or interfere with performance of assigned duties. This may be a sign of a significant or unhealthy stress response or a clinically significant mental health change. You should report any concerns to the appropriate personnel like your team leader or safety officer. Simple interventions in the field, such as providing adequate rest or temporarily remove the person from a stressful situation, are likely to enable a responder to resume duties in a meaningful way. All SMAT units need specific fire safety planning that is in compliance with state laws. A fire safety plan will list specific information about the maximum occupancy of tents or facilities, fire exits and signage, fire alarm systems, fire drills, and hazardous materials that pose a fire risk. A fire watch is a method of watching for fire when a fire protection system is out of service or in field conditions. While the specific job functions of Firewatch are beyond the scope of this introductory program, it is fairly basic knowledge that sand buckets and fire extinguishers are two ways that fires can be extinguished. Since the U.S. Fire Administration advises that only trained personnel should use a fire extinguisher, this should be done prior to a deployment. Every SMRS or SMAT responder should be trained in the location and proper use of the fire extinguishers. All responders should be aware of the PASS method for using fire extinguishers. Remember, PASS stands for pull, aim, squeeze, and sweep. And when aiming, you should aim for the base of the fire. In order for SMAT members to fulfill their operational mission, they must make personal health and safety a top priority. The protection of responders' health and safety begins with adequate preparation at home by maintaining a sound state of physical and mental health. Although many risks may be present during the deployment, an awareness of these risks and the mitigating steps to reduce their potential for causing serious injury or death will increase the overall safety of an SMAT deployment.